I considered it a great honor to work in the Bush administration and work so closely with Secretary of State Jim Baker, to also have some small but meaningful interaction with President George Herbert Walker Bush. I had such great admiration for President Bush 41. He was a veteran, combat veteran of World War II. I saw again and again, there was President John Kennedy, combat veteran from World War II, Secretary Shultz, Secretary Baker, combat veterans in the Marines, President George Herbert Walker Bush, combat veteran. It just seemed to me that experience molded them into such incredible public servants. It was a great honor for me to be associated with Bush 41. But as 1992 was an election year, and President Bush would be running against Governor Bill Clinton from Arkansas as a civil servant, foreign service officer, career officer. Of course, we played no role in politics, but I had the opportunity to watch and see and come to understand how the POW-MIA issue had such dramatic impact on the 1992 election and actually provided the events that would lead to Governor Clinton's victory and President Bush's defeat. And it all centered around Ross Perot. If you remember, Ross Perot was a minority candidate, but one who achieved a huge number of votes. And Perot ran as a third-party candidate and drained votes from Bush across the country and in so many states that arguably turned the election, allowed Governor Clinton to win those states, get the electoral votes, and become President of the United States. Why was Perot involved? Goes back to that Reagan administration. Perot wanted to be involved, wanted to be the person, believed he could be the person who could go to Indochina, could go to Vietnam, and could find live American prisoners and bring them home. And he believed that he had, from a conversation he had with President Ronald Reagan, he believed he had the mandate to do that. And I know this from looking at and reading all of the records, going carefully over all the POW-MIA communications in the U.S. government. I was in the Philippines when this happened, but I had the access to the documents. And so Perot, in 1987 and 88, is in Southeast Asia and is beginning his efforts and is telling people at the U.S. Embassy in Thailand and elsewhere that he's the president's special representative. He's got the mandate from President Reagan, and he is going to be making efforts to enter these countries, deal with those governments, and account for missing Americans. Well, as the documents would indicate from discussions in the U.S. government during the Reagan administration, President Reagan had not given any such mandate to Ross Perot, but it was a problem that he was acting as though it had happened. And so at the White House, in the Reagan White House, they turned to Vice President Bush, the military veteran, to solve this issue. And Vice President Bush came up with what he felt was the absolute best way to do this, that would not be controversial, that would have great support in America. He turns to retired General Jack Vessey, World War II hero, veteran, had risen from being an enlisted man to 4-star general, one of the most distinguished American patriots in the country, who was retired from the military, living in Minnesota. And he says, General Vessey, please come out of retirement. Come and be the special presidential emissary on POWMIA affairs. General Vessey agrees. The announcement is made in 1988. And now it's clear to everyone that Ross Perot is not the special presidential emissary. General Vessey is. Perot is undercut in what he saw as his heroic mission, and he becomes so embittered against Vice President Bush and carries it over against him as he's president. And in 1992, driven by this bitterness, Perot mounts his campaign for president, accrues an amazing number of votes, maybe 18% of the vote, doesn't win any electoral votes, but takes so many conservative votes away from Bush that the election goes to Bill Clinton. And the Bush 41 presidential administration ends with the election of 1992, and a new foreign policy team will be put in place by President Clinton. My boss, Assistant Secretary Richard Solomon, would be out. Assistant Secretary Winston Lord would be appointed. I would work for him. I was the one carryover. I was the one official working on Vietnam, working on Cambodia, who would remain in place, who would carry forward the roadmap policy that we had constructed in the Jim Baker State Department, and continue towards our goals, which would be largely the same in Vietnam and Cambodia, but now under a different presidential administration. But I still look back with enormous pride, having been associated with President Bush 41, Secretary Baker, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, with whom I had worked in the Gerald Ford administration, Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I think it was the strongest foreign policy team of any administration during my entire 32 years as a Foreign Service officer, and working closely with Jim Baker, Secretary Baker, and his team under President Bush direction, we had made remarkable progress, and I was so proud and pleased to be part of that.